I'm going to ask you a question right off the bat, and I want an honest answer. If the government you served for 30 years decided your 7-year-old granddaughter's life wasn't worth paperwork to save her, what would you do? Would you accept it? Would you bury your head in your hands and cry while they allocated the funding that was meant for her life, saving treatment to build a new decorative fountain in the city square? I didn't think so, neither did I. They call me a criminal now in some circles, a hero in others, but I don't care about the labels. I'm a retired colonel of the United States Army. I spent my life specializing in tactical dismantling of hostile regimes, and when I realized the most hostile regime my family faced was the one sitting in City Hall, I didn't just get angry. I went to war, and I burned their whole corrupt kingdom to the ground. My name is Colonel Robert Vance, retired, though I've learned you never really retire from being a soldier. Your war just changes venue. For 3 decades, my venue was deserts and jungles, fighting for the red, white, and blue. I believed in the chain of command. I believed in duty, honor, country. I missed birthdays, anniversaries, and my own son's first steps because I was deployed, serving a system I believed protected us. When I finally hung up the uniform, all I wanted was peace. I wanted to sit on my back porch, drink iced tea, and spoil my granddaughter, Lily. Lily was the light of my life. She had these massive green eyes that looked right through my tough exterior, and a laugh that could make you forget you ever saw combat. But when Lily turned 6, the laughing stopped. She started getting tired all the time, bruising like a peach. It took months of terrifying tests to get the diagnosis: a ridiculously rare, aggressive autoimmune disorder. It was practically a death sentence. My son, Mark, and his wife, Sarah, were devastated. They were drowning in medical bills within weeks, and the standard treatments weren't working. Lily was fading right in front of us, becoming a ghost in her own home. Then a miracle happened. We found out about a federally funded experimental treatment program specifically for her condition, run out of the university hospital in our state capital. It was called the Aurora Protocol. It had incredible success rates, but it was hideously expensive, and spots were extremely limited. We applied immediately. I called in every favor I had left from my service days, contacting congressmen I'd once escorted through war zones, just to get Lily's application to the top of the pile. It worked. We got the letter. Lily was accepted. Full funding. Her treatment was scheduled to start in 2 weeks. For the first time in a year, I slept through the night. We all did. We celebrated with a pizza night, and Lily actually ate 2 slices. It felt like we had won the lottery of life. But 10 days before the treatment was supposed to begin, the phone rang. It was a sterile, robotic voice from the Department of Health and Human Services. The Aurora Protocol had been indefinitely suspended. Funding had been reallocated due to budgetary constraints arising from unforeseen municipal exigencies. I thought it was a sick joke. I drove down to the state capitol the next morning, still operating on the naive belief that this was a mistake I could fix with a firm handshake and some logic. I ended up in the office of Councilman Sterling. Sterling was the kind of politician who looked like he was manufactured in a factory: perfect hair, expensive suit, and eyes that held absolutely no genuine human emotion. He was the head of the Appropriations Committee that had yanked the funding. He didn't even have the decency to look at me when I explained that without this treatment, my granddaughter would die within 6 months. He was scrolling through his phone. "Look, Colonel Vance," he said, his voice dripping with dismissive condescension, "I respect your service, truly, but the Aurora Protocol was bleeding money. We had a critical infrastructure failure downtown. The plaza renovation went way over budget. We had to make tough choices. It's utilitarianism. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. I stared at him. A plaza renovation? You're telling me you took the money meant to save dying children to pay for paving stones and benches? He finally looked up, annoyed. It's more complicated than that, and frankly, it's above your pay grade. The decision is final. There are other programs. There weren't other programs. He knew it, and I knew it. I walked out of that office with a buzzing in my ears that I hadn't felt since an ID went off near my Humvee in Fallujah. I drove home in a daze. When I got back, I found Mark sitting in the dark in the living room, holding the rejection letter, just sobbing silently. He looked up at me, his eyes totally broken. "Dad, what are we going to do? They just signed her death warrant." I went upstairs to Lily's room. She was asleep, hooked up to a pathetic little oxygen tank that was barely helping. I watched her small chest heave, fighting for air. And something inside me, something I thought I had buried back in the sandbox, snapped into place. The chain of command was broken. The government had violated its contract with me. I had protected them, and when it was their turn to protect my blood, they chose concrete over a child's life. I realized then that Councilman Sterling wasn't a politician. He was an enemy combatant, and you don't negotiate with enemy combatants who threaten your family. You neutralize them. I went down to my basement. It wasn't a normal basement. It was where I kept the things I couldn't quite let go of. My old gear, maps, tactical manuals, and surveillance equipment I'd legally acquired over the years for consulting work. I didn't sleep that night. I spent 12 hours drafting a new operational order. I called it Operation Scorched Earth. The objective wasn't to physically hurt Sterling. That was too messy, too quick. The objective was total asset denial and reputational annihilation. I needed to find out exactly why that funding was moved. Unforeseen municipal exigencies sounded like cover-up talk for someone got a kickback. The next morning, I told my son to focus on Lily and let me handle the paperwork. I didn't tell him that the paperwork involved long-range directional microphones and GPS trackers. I started with surveillance. I needed to establish Sterling's patterns of life. I bought a nondescript plumbing van, parked it down the street from his office, and spent 3 days living off beef jerky and coffee, watching him. He was sloppy. Arrogant people usually are. They think they're untouchable, so they don't check their six. I saw him taking long lunches with construction contractors. I saw envelopes being exchanged in parking garages, too thick to be just documents. I used a parabolic microphone to catch snippets of conversation. Words like accelerated timeline and off-the-books bonus kept popping up. He was funneling the medical grant money into the construction project, and I'd bet my pension he was getting a massive kickback from the contractors for rushing the job and inflating the costs. But knowing it wasn't enough, I needed proof that would stand up not just in court, but in the court of public opinion. I needed to destroy him so completely that no one would ever trust him again. I needed access to his financials. This was the trickiest part. I'm good with tactics, but I'm not a hacker. Fortunately, the Army introduces you to a lot of interesting people. I made a call to an old contact of mine, a kid I'd gotten out of a messy situation in Kandahar, who now ran a very lucrative, very gray area cybersecurity firm. I told him I needed a favor. I didn't give him details, just a target. 48 hours later, I had an encrypted thumb drive in my mailbox. It contained Sterling's private emails and offshore banking records. It was worse than I thought. The plaza renovation was a massive grift. He had diverted nearly $4 million from health services over 2 years. Lily's program was just the latest victim. And where was the money going? A shell company in the Caymans registered to his wife's maiden name. I sat there in my basement, looking at the smoking gun on my laptop screen. I had the power to end him right then, but I needed to be strategic. I couldn't just hand it to the police. Sterling owned half the police force in that town. This had to be a public execution. So, here's the situation I was in. My granddaughter was dying because a politician wanted a new boat. I had evidence of massive corruption obtained through admittedly illegal surveillance and hacking, and if I made one wrong move, I'd be the one in prison while Lily died. Before I tell you how I pulled the trigger on Operation Scorched Earth, I want you to pause and head to the comments. Tell me if you held that thumb drive in your hand, knowing what was at stake. Would you have used it? Would you have crossed that line? Let me know below. All right, here's what happened. I decided the best weapon I had wasn't a rifle, it was the media cycle. I spent a week carefully curating the information. I created dossiers, referencing the bank transfers with the dates of the program cancellations. I made it idiot-proof. I made it impossible to ignore. Then, I located the hungriest, most ambitious investigative journalist in the state, a woman named Maria, who had been trying to pin something on Sterling for years, but never had the goods. I set up a meeting in an old diner out on the highway, away from cameras. I slid a manila envelope across the table. It didn't have everything, just enough to whet her appetite. The initial email trail proving he knew cutting the funding would cost lives, and one bank statement showing a $50,000 deposit the day after the decision was made. Her eyes nearly popped out of her head. "Where did you get this?" She whispered. "It doesn't matter." I told her. "What matters is that in 3 days, that man is holding a press conference to unveil his new plaza. I want this story to break while he's standing at that podium." Maria was a shark. She took the bait. For the next 3 days, I continued my surveillance, making sure Sterling didn't get spooked. He was clueless, preening about his upcoming ribbon-cutting ceremony. The day of the press conference arrived. It was a beautiful, sunny day perfect for a political burial. Lily was having a bad day, too weak to even sit up in bed. I kissed her forehead, told her grandpa loved her, and drove to the city square. I stood in the back of the crowd, wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses. Sterling was up there on a makeshift stage, surrounded by his cronies and the corrupt contractors, beaming like he'd just cured cancer. There were huge banners celebrating the urban revitalization project. He started his speech, droning on about fiscal responsibility and civic pride. It was nauseating. Then I saw Maria in the press pit. She looked at her phone, then looked up at me in the crowd and gave the slightest nod. She raised her hand. Sterling, loving the attention, pointed to her. "Yes, Maria, a question about the beautiful stonework." Maria stood up, her voice cutting through the air like a knife. "Actually, Councilman, my question is about the Cayman Islands, specifically the account ending in 4,522 registered to your wife, which received a $200,000 deposit from Bayside Construction yesterday. Is that why you defunded the Children's Aurora Protocol to pay for this plaza? To line your own pockets while children like Lily Vance are left to die?" The silence that fell over that square was heavier than any artillery barrage I'd ever experienced. Sterling's face went from smug to ashen gray in a millisecond. He stammered, That's absurd. I don't know what you're talking about. Security." But Maria wasn't done. "We just published the full report online, Councilman. Emails, bank statements, everything. It's all there. The whole city knows." A murmur rippled through the crowd. People started pulling out their phones. I saw the blood drain from the faces of the contractors standing behind him. Sterling looked like a rat trapped in a spotlight. He tried to leave the podium, but the other reporters were shouting questions now, smelling blood in the water. It was chaos. Beautiful, organized chaos. Within an hour, it was the lead story on every news channel in the state. By that evening, it was national news. The Plaza scandal, they called it. The pressure was immense. The governor, trying to distance himself from the fallout, ordered an immediate emergency investigation. 2 days later, the FBI raided Sterling's home and office. They found the rest of the evidence I hadn't even needed to leak. Sterling was arrested and charged with 24 counts of fraud, embezzlement, and public corruption. He was looking at 20 years, minimum, but the best part wasn't seeing him in handcuffs. The best part was the public outcry. The story of Lily and the other kids who lost their funding went viral. Donations poured into the hospital. The governor, desperate for good PR, immediately reinstated the funding for the Aurora Protocol, using emergency state reserves. We got the call a week after the press conference. Lily's treatment was back on. I remember sitting in the hospital waiting room while Lily received her first infusion. Mark was holding Sarah's hand, both of them crying tears of relief. I wasn't crying. I was just tired. Bone-deep tired. I had fought one last war, and I had won, but it didn't feel like a victory parade. It felt like survival. Lily responded beautifully to the treatment. It's been a year now, and while she's not drastically cured, she's stable. She's back in school half days. She laughs again. That's enough for me. Sterling is currently serving time in a federal penitentiary. I drove by there once, just to make sure he was really gone. The plaza he built is still there, but no one calls it by its official name anymore. They call it Corruption Square. As for me, I spend a lot more time looking over my shoulder. You don't take down a powerful politician without making enemies. But I'd do it again, in a heartbeat. The moral of the story. Sometimes the systems we trust to protect us are the very things that endanger us most. And when that happens, you can't just follow orders. You have to become your own army. You have to fight back. Because if you don't, who will? If you were on my side in this war, hit that like button to show your support. If you want to hear more stories about ordinary people pushed to extraordinary lengths, make sure you subscribe. And seriously, I want to read your thoughts in the comments. Did I go too far? Or did I do exactly what had to be done? I'll see you all in the next story.